Today we're going to take a brief look at the history of windmills in Jersey. Go down any of the island's major valleys and the observant traveller will quickly see evidence of the island's watermilling past, yet few people are aware of the remaining vestiges of Jersey's windmilling heritage. Today we're going to put that right. From way back in prehistory, mankind has been gathering grain and grinding it into flour. In Jersey, many quernstones have been found from the Neolithic period that show our ancestors were doing just that. It was a method that sufficed for thousands of years. However, even before the Industrial Revolution, people were finding more efficient ways to produce flour. The first mention of a windmill in the island is from 1292, when it is written that a windmill was erected by Mr. Galinchon at Augray in the parish of Trinity. It was built because the seigneur of Augray's own watermill couldn't grind enough grain for the tenants' needs. It was also built illegally, as Mr. Galinchon had failed to get the king's permission, as was required of all mills. There are mentions of windmills in both St. Martin's and St. Wan's in the 14th century, and it is claimed that a windmill on the site of Elizabeth Castle was demolished in the 16th century to make way for its expansion. In the 16th century, records show that there were 3 windmills in the island, in St. Wan, Roselle and Grouville. And although their exact locations are unknown, it is likely that the windmills that can be found in those parishes today are built on or near those sites from 500 years ago. In later years, windmills were erected in St. Peter's, Montmado in St. John's, and somewhat surprisingly on the lower lying land at Balroyal. Of the structures that remain, St. Wan's, Grouville and St. Peter's mills were built in the 19th century, while Roselle Mill predates them. However, the structure at Roselle has been adapted and altered and rebuilt throughout its lifetime, so an exact date of construction is impossible to determine. From illustrations of the earliest windmills, it seems safe to say that they were of the post-mill design, examples of which can still be found throughout Europe. This was a square wooden structure which revolved around a central post so that the whole building could be turned so that the sails faced the wind. Later, stone-built designs had domed roofs housing the sails and drive shaft, which could be manually turned into the prevailing wind, and later still a fantail was added which automatically adjusted the dome's position to maximize efficiency. Early sails were made out of canvas, either rigged to spars like a boat's sails or attached to a framework. Depending on the strength of the wind, more or less sailcloth could be used to get the optimum speed for milling. Later, adjustable louvre panels made up the sails, which enabled the miller to easily adjust the sail's trim to get the speed he required. Well, we've had a quick look at the history. Now let's have a look at the individual mills, and we'll start our tour with the ones we know about that no longer exist. Montmado is an area along St. John's north coast above Bonwy Bay. It's one of the highest areas of the island, so was an ideal site for a windmill. The mill was of a comparatively squat design and was erected sometime prior to 1830, and although it had a fantail mechanism to adjust the dome's position, its sails were less sophisticated, a frame covered with sailcloth that had to be adjusted manually. As well as being the ideal windmill site, Montmado was also the site of a quarry that produced the most sought-after granite in the island, which was the mill's undoing. Gradually, the land around which it stood was quarried away, which not only made access more difficult, but also affected the wind, causing updrafts that seriously affected the sails. By 1880, the mill had ceased working, gradually falling into ruins. 30 years later, it was gone altogether, as the land on which it stood was quarried away for its precious granite. A windmill at Balroyal was built around 1830 and to the most up-to-date design. However, there was a post-windmill in the area that preceded it. It was sited on what is now the landward side of Victoria Avenue, just opposite the entrance to Balroyal car park, and for the first few decades it thrived. By 1860 a steam engine had been added to the site, but its success was not to last. By 1886, the mill was owned by Mr. Gossett, who was badly affected when the Jersey banking company failed. He sold the property to Mr. Emil Voisin, who immediately demolished the mill and built a terrace of houses. The main structure of Grouville Mill still stands on the area known as Balvois, on the high promontory overlooking Grouville Bay, on or near the site that a windmill has stood since at least the beginning of the 14th century. It remained a working mill until about 1900, and with its dome and sails removed, was converted into an artillery observation tower by the German occupying forces. In later years, it has formed the base of a private home. Roselle Mill has been much altered over the centuries and differs from the other remaining Jersey windmills in both size and design, and predates the other surviving towers by several decades. It was a smaller, shorter structure of a more basic design. The sails were just cloth on a framework, and the dome had to be turned into the wind by man or horsepower. It fell into disuse at the start of the 20th century. The sails and dome were removed around 1910, and like the other coastal towers, was used as an observation post during the occupation. Today it sits by the driveway to a private house. St. Wan's Windmill stands on the headland overlooking St. Wan's Bay, in what must be one of the windiest places in the island. Although there has been a windmill on the site for between 400 and 600 years, this building dates back to the mid-1800s. Its 43 feet height dominates the landscape, and must have been quite a sight in its glory days. As with Grouville, St. Peter's and Balroyal windmills, it was of the latest design, with adjustable sails and an automated dome, and again, like its contemporaries, it worked until the 20th century arrived. It was decommissioned in 1907 and bought by the States in 1911 for £100. It too was converted into an observation tower in the 1940s, and today is used by the Jersey Sea Scouts. And finally we come to St. Peter's Windmill, which was built in 1837. Its tower is 43 feet tall, and it's 27 feet wide at the base and 19 feet wide at the top, and its sails were over 30 feet long. Like all the other island's windmills, by 1911 technology had overtaken it. Its sails were removed and a Petter oil engine installed to provide power to the mill. It was converted into a pub in the 1950s, and faux sails were added in a 1970s refurbishment. And today it is the centre for the jeweller Catherine Best, who uses the buildings as a workshop, showroom and restaurant. This, of all the island's remaining windmills, gives some idea of the grandeur of Jersey's windmilling past, and what a sight it must have been when the sails were turning and the millstones were grinding. Well, I hope you've enjoyed our brief glimpse of Jersey's windmilling past. I'm Richard, and this video is brought to you by Jersey, a Guide.